Now, quickly before I go any further, if you could drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, that would be much appreciated. Other than that, let's get into the video. I made a Toronto Raptors video the other day, so I wasn't planning on making one so soon, but after doing some scrolling, after seeing some interactions, I've seen that the disrespect around the Raptors is still there, even after last year, finishing the season with the second most wins, falling one game short of the Eastern Conference Finals after winning a championship the year before, where they were disrespected that whole year as well. I've seen the disrespect is probably at an all-time high, with people going as far as saying the Atlanta Hawks are going to finish with more wins than the Raptors, or at least be in that same conversation. A team that had like 20 wins last year, as opposed to the second best team in the league on records last year, is going to finish with around the same amount of wins because they signed a few good players and the Raptors didn't make any big signings of note, even though they kept together their whole core that was the core that led them to the second most wins in the NBA and led them to one game short of the Eastern Conference Finals, despite Pascal Siakam having the worst stretch of his career, basically. Yeah, that core is not going to be good enough to finish up towards the top of the Eastern Conference. I think what this says to me is people just underestimate continuity as a team. You look at this team, and sure, they didn't add in any other big names, and maybe they need a big name to get them over the edge. Maybe that's what they were lacking against the Celtics. But at the very least, we know they're going to be a very good regular season team and compete in the playoffs like they did, despite players underperforming throughout those series. So why, for no reason, are they just going to fall off a cliff? One argument was they lost Ibaka. Okay, I'll give you that. He was an important player. They did replace Ibaka with, they re-signed Boucher, who I think is going to improve. We'll talk about that. They replaced Gasol with Baines, who I think is probably an upgrade at this stage in their careers. Someone who's a better shooter. He's a high IQ player as well. He can defend as well. He doesn't get up vertically. They're very similar players, except Baines is a much better shooter at this point in his career. And I don't think people actually watched the Raptors during the playoffs because Gasol was bad. Like, sure, he still had a presence on defense, but offensively, he was terrible. Like, he was hard to watch. He wasn't shooting the ball, and when he wasn't making the shots, and he just wasn't that good. So you're bringing in Baines. I think at worst, that's a like-for-like swap with potential for an upgrade there. And sure, Ibaka's a big loss, but you brought in Alex Len, who's a good backup center, and you re-signed Boucher, who I think has room to improve, despite his age being 27. He's only played a few years in the league, and this was the first year where he got significant minutes and did well in those significant minutes. And then the Lowry, that's the other reason they're supposed to fall off. Kyle Lowry, who was the best player in the Boston Celtics' first Raptors series, a series that involved guys like Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. I thought Lowry outperformed all of those guys, or at the very least was in that same category as Tatum. Why is he falling off a cliff? He's an undersized point guard that relies on his IQ, skill, and strength. So why Lowry would fall off a cliff? Maybe he regresses a bit. He's still at the very least going to be like a 16-7 guy who can get you a bucket in the playoffs and get you some stops. So that argument doesn't really hold up either. What argument really holds up for the Raptors falling off a cliff? Now, I could argue, yes, other teams did get better like the Bucks, and that's why I'd have them a bit ahead of the Raptors now, but why would the Raptors just suddenly fall off? Why are we looking at the Celtics and not saying the same thing? You could make the same argument. I mean, they lost Gordon Hayward. Kemba Walker's more riddled with injuries than Kyle Lowry, despite the age difference, and no one's talking about that. So why all of a sudden is it just the Raptors that are going to fall off because they don't have the same kind of names? That's pretty much all I can pin it down to. They don't have the same kind of flashy names, or they're not the same kind of big franchise that these other teams are. That's really all I can think of at this point in time, because how you could think the Raptors would be a low 8th, 7th seed in the East, or just out of the playoffs altogether, which is ludicrous. The majority of NBA fans don't believe that, so I'm not going to hold on to that, but like, I've seen people say that, which is just unbelievable to say that. But how you could think they'd just fall off for no reason? I mean, they've re-signed Freddie VanVleet, who I think's got room for improvement, considering you look at guys like Lowry, a prototypical guy, that same kind of size, similar kind of play style. He had a career year at like 30, 28, and VanVleet's only about 26 now, just had the best year of his career the first year as a starter and now got paid and is playing in the same team that he's played in for a few years. So everything to me suggests he's got even more room to improve. And even if he doesn't, what he was giving you was good enough to be a good above average starting shooting guard or point guard, whichever position you choose to play, interchangeable kind of, in the league. So without improvement, he's going to be good. And with the improvement that I expect, given his period of time in the league and given what he's done every single year getting better, there's room for improvement, there's room for optimism with Van Vliet. And then look at other guys. OG Anunoby, I think he's the wild card. People always like to talk. OG Anunoby, I think he's the wild card. He's entering his 4th year. He just had the best year of his career where he started the most games and he finally got some more responsibility on offense. I mean, at the very least, he's going to be a lockdown defender, which, I mean, he pretty much already is. And then he started to put the ball on the deck a bit. He started to play make a bit, get to the rim, shoot the 3 ball, do everything more effectively offensively. And to think that he wouldn't get any better from this point on is crazy. He's only 23. He just had the best year of his career, as I've said. He's in an environment where he's comfortable. He knows the coaching. He knows the system. He knows the players. And he's just going to get better. Like, it's just going to happen. So that's another room for optimism. Pascal Siakam. Maybe Pascal Siakam's peaked. Maybe he's never going to be the player that they want him to be. But he's peaked at a pretty good level. He's peaked at an all-star level. And he just had the worst playoff stretch like you could imagine. Everyone's talking about how absolutely terrible he is, how he's not a first option, how he can't be the best player on a championship team. While that might be true, he was that bad, and the Raptors, again, nearly beat the Boston Celtics, who then were very neck and neck with the Miami Heat, who then made the finals. Like, are you seeing what I'm saying? So you're basically looking at a team that went neck and neck with the Celtics, that were neck and neck with the Heat, that made the NBA Finals. And Pascal Siakam was terrible. Supposedly their best player, their second best player, I think Lowry's a better player, but their second best player at the very least was terrible, and that all happened. He's not going to be that bad next playoffs. Sure, he might not ever develop into the player they need him to be, but at the very least, he's going to be better than he was. So all these factors, I'm looking at just a number of factors that suggest, at the very least, they're going to stay the same. Like, what's the reason for them falling off? They've got one of the best coaches in the league. They've got continuity, which is completely underrated. You look at new teams like the Clippers, the chemistry's all over the place. The chemistry is not going to be an issue for the Raptors. Their chemistry is through the roof, and that's something that's maintained over the last several years, really, the last couple of years in particular, where they've been more of a threat so than ever. And all of these things just lead to me thinking they're going to, at the very least, be good. They've got an elite defensive team, whichever way you slice it. Lowry, Van Vliet, Siakam, Anunoby, Baines, Boucher, even the signing they made of Malachi Flynn's a good defensive guard. Norman Powell can defend. You've got all these guys that can defend, and at the very least, you know they're going to be an elite defensive team with some room for improvement offensively. So how they're going to fall off a cliff is unbeknownst to me, but apparently they're just going to suddenly stop winning games. But let's talk about a few of the signings they made. They brought in Malachi Flynn, who I think was probably the only real thing of note apart from the re-signings and the guys like Baines and Boucher that I already mentioned. But he's probably the most NBA-ready prospect in the draft, and you're bringing him into a system that has really done the most to get the best out of point guards and get the best out of undrafted, late drafted prospects, all these kind of rookies. They always do the best to get the most out of them, and I'm expecting him to come in and make an impact from the get-go. To be honest, that's what I expect. He's a mature age guy. There's a reason they picked him. They know he's going to come in. They want him to impact the team from the get-go. So I thought I'd just make this video because it seems as though people have forgot what this Raptors team is. An elite defensive team with one of the best coaches in the league, with a fantastic backcourt, with a high upside guy in OG Anunoby, with an all-star level player in Pascal Siakam, an incredibly good bench with Norman Powell, Chris Boucher now, Malachi Flynn, all these guys coming off the bench, Matt Thomas, a number of these guys, and then a great signing in Aaron Baines. This is still one of the best teams in the league. They might be tier 2 contenders. I think I'd have teams like the Bucks, the Lakers, and probably the Clippers ahead of them, but I'm not having the Raptors that much behind those teams because of all the reasons I mentioned. They've had the continuity. They've got championship experience. How many teams can you say that about? For them to just fall off and for people to think that they're going to be a 7th or 8th seed, which we saw this last year. We saw this exact same thing happen last year, and they ended up as the 2nd best team in the league, record-wise, and going close to an Eastern Conference Finals. So just don't expect the Raptors to fall off anytime soon. I really don't know where this logic or reasoning's coming from. I don't think there is any logic or reasoning behind saying this, because everything just suggests this team's going to be at the very least as good, if not better, heading into next year. And I know they didn't make the same kind of blockbuster signings, blockbuster trades that a lot of other teams made, but that doesn't mean they can't get better internally, and that doesn't mean their continuity can't be underrated, their chemistry, everything they've done to get to where they are. That doesn't mean you should underestimate how important that stuff is to getting better, because there's a reason they were still the second best team in the league last year on record, and it wasn't because they had Kawhi Leonard, because they didn't. Newsflash. So yeah, the Raptors are still going to be great, and anyone saying otherwise is just delusional at this point in time. I'm not a Raptors fan, let me just make that clear, so I'm not biased. I don't really care. I just care about people saying absolute false stuff about Toronto being a bad team when they're still going to be one of the best teams in the NBA, and I think they're still a championship contender, albeit maybe a tier 2 championship contender. They're still a contender at the very least. I'm putting them in the same category as the Boston Celtics. Why should I think otherwise? Why should I think otherwise? I don't know. Now, if you did make it to the end of the video, if you did enjoy the video, a like would be greatly appreciated. Sub to the channel as well, that would also be much appreciated. Other than that, I'll catch you next time. Bye.